If you know a story, don't keep it to yourself. There once was a girl who spoke with the spirits. She hadn't asked for this ability, but there it was, and she was respected for this gift. Her sister was to be married. One day, the bridegroom arrived for the wedding, accompanied by his friends. Whoa! Yeah! The two parties greeted each other. The bride introduced her mother, and then her sister.
You're the one who talks to spirits.
I am.
I don't believe in spirits.
You would do well to do so. They can hurt you or help you if you keep them peaceful.
The only thing that can hurt me is a knife or a fall from a horse.
Evening came. The night before the wedding, as was the custom, the time was to be spent in everyone telling stories.
It is right and good before a wedding to clear the air for our spirits by telling the tales we need to tell. Can't you feel the unsettled spirits around us? Let us put them to rest.
I have come to embarrass the bridegroom with stories of his youth.
And as he told these silly stories, the gathering laughed. And the spirits were settled.
Once upon a time, when I was a little girl.
And they were all touched.
We like to tell the story of our first time on horseback together.
And they all cried and laughed. And the spirits were called. The bride's sister was up next.
It is so wonderful to hear all of your stories. I feel safe and honored.
And she told of the power of the spirits, of the hills, and of the horses. Then all had told their stories, but when at last came the time of the turn of the bridegroom,
I don't know any stories.
they were surprised.
But it is tradition. We have all told our story. Now it is your turn.
I don't want to waste a beautiful spring evening, which is short enough already, swapping tales. I like to be alone with my bride.
The wedding guests were astounded. The bride's mother and little sister were very unhappy.
You are stirring up the spirits.
It is tradition.
I don't know any stories.
How about the time you were thrown from the horse?
I don't know that story.
Or the time that you stole the...
Enough! I'm not telling any stories. That's final.
There was silence, and the spirits were not happy. There was nothing for them all to do but to go to bed and let the bridegroom spend the rest of the evening with his bride. But the bride's little sister could not get to sleep. She could feel the spirits were deeply unsettled by the untold stories of the bridegroom. She got out of bed and crept to the yurt where the young couple were. Suddenly, what did she see but two spirits tiptoeing quietly toward that very yurt?
Tomorrow, after the wedding party will make its way toward the bridegroom's yurt. Along the way, I will turn myself into a stream. The day will be very hot, and the bridegroom will come to take a drink of me. The moment he does so, I will steal all his bones from his body.
This was the spirit of the bridegroom's story of cowardice.
Very good. And in case that fails, I will turn myself into a golden knife in a silver sheath, and I will lie on the road at a day's journey from you. When the bridegroom takes me in his hand, I will cut his finger, and he will turn into fire.
This was the spirit of the bridegroom's story of fear. The two spirits tiptoed off into the night, laughing to themselves. The bride's little sister realized that the two spirits were out to get revenge on the groom, for he had dared to refuse to share his stories with the wedding guests. In the morning was the wedding. At noon, the newlyweds loaded the bride's dowry onto horses and set off to go from the bride's yurt to the groom's. The bride's little sister, who knew what was going to happen, begged them to take her along. But the groom absolutely refused and set off with his new wife. The sister was desperate, and she took the fastest horse from her father's herd and rode after him. The day was hot, and the caravan began to keep an eye out for water. The bridegroom rode ahead, looking for a well or a brook. Soon, he caught sight of the stream. He went up to find out whether the water was good for drinking and whether he should lead the caravan to it. When the bride's sister saw this, she spurred on her horse, raced past the bridegroom, and jumped into the stream to muddy the waters so he could not drink.
Are you crazy?
The spirits are after you. You must tell your story.
What is that to you? Leave me alone.
The groom was furious and rode after her, but she was a good rider and stayed out of his reach. The caravan went on, with the sister just off to the side. The day passed. Suddenly, the bridegroom saw something shining on the road. There lay the golden knife in its silver sheath. He rode to pick it up, but again the bride's little sister spurred on her horse and raced past him. She grabbed the knife and broke it into little pieces. The bridegroom was even more furious. He scolded his sister-in-law.
What has gotten into you, you stupid little girl?
I am trying to save you.
Leave me alone! Leave me alone!
And he spurred his horse to cut her off. He caught her and knocked her off her horse. The sister was on the ground, stunned, and the bridegroom was stunned to look down on her.
What have I done?
Then he spurred his horse and galloped back to the caravan. He hurried the wedding party onto the bridegroom's yurt. And the first thing the bridegroom did was to tell his father about the terrible behavior of the bride's little sister, but also how he had hurt her. The sister entered the yurt, and the father questioned her.
Why do you treat my son this way?
He refused to tell his story. This riled the spirits, so much so that they would murder him. I saved him each time.
Son, you must tell your story.
But why?
Every person must share his story to become fully human, especially at the beginning of a marriage. You take risks, the spirits of those stories haunting you.
And at this moment, the spirits rose up and attacked the bridegroom and drove him to distraction.
Okay, I will.
And so, the bridegroom told his story. And when he finished, the spirits of the stories were called. And the company was quiet. The bridegroom turned to his little sister and said,
I feel easier. Thank you. And I'm sorry.
Everyone apologized and brought the little sister presents and did their best to make it up to her. And the bridegroom never, ever withheld his stories again. If you know a story, don't keep it to yourself. The end.
and find for yourself wealth and happiness. He kissed his son goodbye and sent him on his way. The son walked for 3 days and 3 nights, crossed 3 mountains and 3 valleys, and at last came to a well-traveled road. It so happened that just then a rich man was traveling along the road to the town with a nanny goat and a kid to sell. He was leading the nanny on a rope, and the kid was trotting along behind. The thief crept up and dragged the kid into the bushes. When the rich man looked back, he was astonished not to see the kid. Gag, thought the rich man. It seems that he has stopped somewhere along the way. I'll have to go back for him. And tying the nanny to a tree, he set off back down the road. At this, the thief popped out from behind the tree and stole the nanny as well. At this, the rich man retraced his footsteps until he could go no farther, and not finding the kid, he went back to where he had tied the nanny. But when he got to the tree, all that was left of her was a dangling bit of rope. The rich man was completely confused. He put his head in his hands and began to bawl for help. Meanwhile, the thief waded across the river, hid in the bushes, and began to bleat like a goat. At this, the rich man was overjoyed. The nanny and the kid must be grazing over there in that meadow, he said to himself. He took off his clothes. He jumped in the river, and he swam across. Meanwhile, the thief crossed the ford, seized the rich man's clothes, and hid again in the bushes. The rich man searched the whole meadow, but could not find trace of either nanny or kid. And when he got back to the other side of the river, he could not find his clothes. Naked and shivering, he stood weeping on the bank, cursing the thief and his own misfortune. It so happened that just then a rich caravan was passing by. The leader of the caravan decided to stop there for the night. The rich man ran to them, and stark naked, blushing furiously. "Go away at once," he babbled. "It's not safe here. This place is haunted by an invisible thief. He has robbed me of everything I had, and he will rob you as well." "Oh, no, he won't," laughed the man. "We will post a watch for the night." They unloaded the camels, piled all the goods in a heap, and lay down to sleep, leaving 2 men to watch the goods. The 2 watchmen built a fire and settled down to wait for the thief. Midnight came. "That thief won't come," said the first watchman. "Oh, yes, he will," said the second. "I say he won't," cried the first, "and I say he will." As they were quarreling, the thief crawled up, unnoticed, and taking careful aim, poked his finger into the eye of the first watchman. The watchman howled in pain. "Ah!" he screamed. "Will you get a beating for that?" And he threw himself on his friend. They began to roll and tumble about on the ground, cursing and beating each other unmercifully. Meanwhile, the caravan was awakened by all the noise. Thinking that the guards had caught the thief, the men came running. They saw one man on the ground and the other sitting astride him, beating and pounding away. They all fell in a pile on the man on the ground and began pummeling at him. But in the darkness, they could not make out which was the thief, which was the watchman, who was a friend, and themselves and looked about. They were black and blue from head to foot. The thief was nowhere to be seen, and all the camels had vanished. They set out at once in pursuit of the thief. Then the thief came out from his hiding place and dragged off the bales of goods. He loaded them on the camels and set out for town, where he sold everything for a very good price. Then, finding himself a little hut not far from the bazaar, he settled down. Now, in this town there lived a mighty sultan. Soon word reached the thief that the sultan had among his treasures a gold nugget as big as a horse's head. Where the sultan kept this nugget, no one knew. One night, the thief crept up to the sultan's yurt and, peeking through a crack, whispered, "Sultan! Sultan! Wake up! They have stolen your nugget!" The sultan, in a panic, awakened his wife. She raised her pillow, and there glittered the gold nugget. "It must be someone else they have robbed," she said. The sultan began to snore again. Ah! Ha! Next day, the thief crawled down through the smoke hole into the yurt of the sultan, took the nugget from under the pillow of the sultan's wife, and disappeared. When the sultan discovered that his nugget was gone, he flew into a wild rage and vowed to catch the thief no matter what. He ordered gold to be scattered on the road, and on each side of the road, he placed guards with strict orders to seize whoever tried to pick up so much as one gold coin. Hearing of this, the thief disguised himself as a water carrier, smeared his heels with clay, and taking a pail in each hand, began to carry water back and forth past the watchman.
Good day.
The watchman did not notice that, as the thief walked up and down with his sticky feet, he was walking away with the treasure. By the time the watchman realized what was going on, it was too late. Trembling with fear, they threw themselves at the sultan's feet. When the sultan heard what had happened, he shrieked in a rage and ordered the watchman be executed forthwith. Next day, the sultan ordered a bag full of gold to be tied tight and laid in the street. And on either side of the street, he again posted a guard. Aha! But this did not discourage the thief. He bought a white horse. And he smeared one side of it with soot. Leaping into the saddle, he galloped past the guards, seized the bag of gold, and vanished from sight. When the sultan heard what had happened, he shrieked even louder than before. Fools! At least was she that the thief fell in love in spite of himself. Gently lifting the necklace from around the maiden's neck, he bent over and kissed her on the lips. Instantly, the Sultan's daughter awoke and seized the thief by the hand. "At last we have caught you, you wretched thief," she cried. "This time you will not get away."
Madam, there is no need to raise a cry in the night. Why not wait until morning? I promise not to run away.
The Sultan's daughter believed the thief, and holding him tightly by the hand, she settled down to wait for dawn. At last, the thief said,
Madam, my hand is completely numb. Take pity on me and hold me by my other hand.
"Very well," said the Sultan's daughter, letting go of the thief. "Hold out your other hand." But no sooner had she let go of his hand than the thief darted out of her yurt, leaped onto his horse, and galloped off into the night. The maiden began to cry loudly for help, and the Sultan came running at once. When he heard what had happened, he sank to his knees in despair. "Oh, who will deliver me from this accursed thief?" he cried. In a short time, a messenger came to the Sultan with this message from the Khan. "If you, O Sultan, are so insignificant that you cannot deal with the thief who has set up headquarters in your capital, then you must give up your kingdom to me. If you refuse, I will take it by force." At this, the Sultan was most upset indeed, and he answered the Khan thus. "O great Khan, you would be right to take away my kingdom if it was an ordinary thief that I could not manage. But this wretch, who has caused me so much misery, surpasses in cleverness all thieves who have come before him. And even you, O mighty Khan, would be powerless to deal with him." When the Khan received this answer, he flew into a terrible rage and again sent his messenger to the Sultan. "Oh, insolent Sultan," wrote the Khan, "I will give you 40 days. If during this time your thief has stolen so much as a splinter from my palace, you shall have half of all I possess. But if the thief does not succeed in robbing me, you will give up your kingdom to me. And I warn you, if you do not, there will be left of your capital not one stone standing upon another, and you will be my slave forever." At this, the Sultan's spirits sank completely. He then ordered all of his subjects to gather in the town square, and seated on his horse before them, he read aloud the message of the Khan. "I know that one of you is the thief," he then said. "Whichever of you it is, I promise him the following. If, within the next 40 days, he manages to steal anything at all from the palace of the Khan, I will give him my daughter's hand in marriage, and he shall be my rightful heir besides." Saying this, the Sultan went back to his yurt for 40 days to sulk there alone, not sleeping a wink and refusing all food.
No, thank you.
When 39 days had passed, the thief said to himself,
It is time to get down to business.
he bought himself a camel. And a goat skin. With horns. To the hairs of this goat skin, he tied hundreds of bells. Then he set out at once for the capital of the Khan, where he spent a day in a tea house waiting for nightfall. When night came, the thief took the camel by the leash and went to the palace of the Khan. The thief tied up the camel, climbed up a tree, and let himself in through a window. Then he sat down by the door of the Khan's bedroom. The Khan was in bed, snoring peacefully. Suddenly, there came a fearful jangling of bells. The Khan grew pale and cried to his wife, "Wife, wife, what can that be?" "I do not know," she said. "Go and see who dares to disturb our sleep." The Khan took a lantern and, cold with fear, opened the door. There sat the thief in his goatskin shaking madly and jangling his bells. "Who are you?" croaked the Khan, dropping his lantern.
I am a devil!
"What do you want from me?" asked the Khan, more hoarsely than before.
I have come for your soul!
At this, the Khan fell on his knees and begged to be allowed to say goodbye to his wife.
Very well, but be quick about it. I'm in a hurry to return to the netherworld.
The Khan ran like a madman into the bedroom, shouting, "Wife! Wife! A devil has come for my soul! Hide me somewhere, quick!" The Khan's wife opened a trunk, and the Khan jumped in. Then she leaped in after him and closed the lid. The thief walked into the bedroom, tied up the trunk with rope, dragged it out into the street, loaded it onto his camel, and set out for home. In the morning, the Sultan came out of his yurt, and there sat a trunk from the palace of the Khan. The Sultan was overjoyed. He sent again for all his followers and said to them, "Here stands a trunk from the palace of the Khan. Let the thief who stole it come to me now and say what he wishes to have, and I will grant it him, as I promised." The thief stepped forward.
I am the thief who you could not catch, O Sultan. And it was I who stole this trunk from the palace of the Khan. In it are the Khan himself and his wife.
The Sultan ordered the trunk to be opened. A servant approached and cautiously lifted the lid. And sure enough, out of the trunk stepped the Khan and his wife, not daring to raise their eyes, so ashamed and humiliated were they. The Sultan said to the Khan, "You laughed when the thief stole mere things from me. And what has he stolen from you? But you yourself." Then, calling his daughter out of her yurt, he said to the thief, "Here is my daughter. From this day on, you will be my vizier and rightful heir." For what could be more useful to a sultan in his dealings than a clever thief? The Sultan gave a magnificent feast, and at this feast, the best singers performed, and competitions were held among the most skillful riders of the steppe. But even through all the celebration, the thief decided
Aha!
he wanted to stay a thief, and his father was very proud. The end.
The Woodcutter's Daughter. Once upon a time, in a smoky dugout in the barrenmost part of the steppe, there lived an aged woodcutter and his little daughter. The old woodcutter was wretchedly poor. For goods he had only a chipped axe, and for livestock, a broken-down donkey and a miserable old ox. But wise men say the happiness of a rich man lies in his flocks, the happiness of a poor man in his children. And truly, the woodcutter had only to look at his daughter, and all of his troubles would vanish. His daughter was named Aina. So wise, so beautiful, and well-behaved was she, that whoever saw her fell in love on the spot. Children came came riding from faraway villages to play with her, and grown-ups came just as far to chat with her. One day, the woodcutter loaded his bundle of wood onto his tired old donkey and bade his daughter farewell.
Dear Elena, I'm going to the bazaar and I will not be back until evening. You must not be lonely without me. If I manage to sell the firewood, I will buy you a beautiful shawl.
May all go well with you, Father, and may luck shine down upon you. But I beg you, please be careful. The bazaar, it is said, is one of the worst places on the earth, where fortunes are made by some, but lost by others. Come back as soon as you can, and I'll keep supper warm for you.
The woodcutter gave the donkey a nudge and set forth. When he arrived at the bazaar,
Hey! You see what we have?
Five silver, five silver. You silver fly. Oh, I'm I need to sell myself. 5 silver.
What would you do? All right, I'll give you a better price.
Firewood.
he tied up the donkey to one side and began to wait for someone to buy his firewood.
Five
silver.
Price is dropped. 4 silver. 4 silver. Firewood for sale. Very nice.
Time passed,
Firewood.
but no one approached them.
Firewood. Sale.
At last, a rich young man came wandering through the bazaar, pluming his fine black beard and preening his silken robe. He saw the ragged old man with his firewood and decided to play a trick on him.
Say there, old man, is that firewood you're selling?
It is.
And what are you asking for that bundle there?
1 piece of silver.
And are you selling the firewood for that price as is?
The woodcutter did not understand the words of the young man, but seeing nothing wrong in them, he answered,
Yes.
Very well. Here's your silver
Oh.
piece. Drive your donkey after me.
When they reached the rich man's palace, the woodcutter began to untie the cord to take down the bundle of firewood. But suddenly, the rich man hit him a blow on the chest and cried for everyone to hear.
What do you think you're doing, you stupid man? Don't tell me you think you can take your donkey with you. Didn't I buy your firewood as is? That donkey belongs to me. You got your price and now you're trying to cheat me.
The woodcutter began to object, but the young man would have none of it. He shook his fist in the old man's face and yelled louder than ever.
Ah!
Then, seizing the old man by the sleeve, he dragged him off to the judge. Wisely is it said, a crooked rich man can make a racehorse out of an old nag, and a crooked judge somebody else's out of what is yours. After the judge had listened to both sides, he stroked his beard, taking in the silken robe of the rich man, and announced his verdict.
The woodcutter has already received everything that was his due, and it's his fault if he accepted the conditions of the buyer.
The rich man chuckled over the judge's decision and was very well pleased with his joke. But the woodcutter wept bitter tears and went grieving back to his yurt. While waiting, Ina had more than once to put wood on the fire to keep her father's supper warm. When at last he came stumbling wearily over the doorstep, and Ina saw the tears in his eyes, her heart went black as coal. She threw herself into her father's arms, begging him to tell her the reason for his sadness. The woodcutter told his daughter his tale of woe, and she, with tender kisses and wise words, tried to comfort him. But only at dawn did she manage to wipe away the last of her father's tears. In the morning, exhausted with weeping, the woodcutter was in no condition to go to work. Ina caressed him, saying,
Dear Father, today you are not well and you must stay in bed. Let me go to the bazaar. Perhaps I'll be luckier and fetch a good price for the firewood.
At first the old man would not hear of it, but at to let her go.
Go, my child, if you really want to. But know that I will have no peace until I see you again at my side.
And so Ina loaded onto the old ox the bundle of firewood and set out. At the bazaar, Ina soon saw in the crowd the young man with the fine black beard and the silken robe strutting about, his nose in the air. When he spied the girl with the firewood, he laughed slyly to himself and went up to her.
Say there, little girl, is that firewood you're selling?
It is
And how much are you asking for that bundle there?
2 pieces of silver, please.
And are you selling the firewood for that price as is?
I am, but only if you give me the money as is.
Agree? Agree?
Said the rich man hastily, smiling into his beard.
Drive your ox after me.
When they came to the rich man's house, Ina said,
Where shall I tie up my ox?
the rich man was surprised, but he pointed to a post in the middle of the courtyard. Ina tied up the ox and asked for her money. When the rich man held out 2 silver pieces to her, she said,
But uncle, I have sold you my firewood as is, and therefore I have given you my ox along with the firewood. You have also promised me to give me the money as is. So therefore I not only require the 2 pieces of silver, but your hand as well.
the rich man was struck dumb. When he came to his senses, he began screaming and cursing. But no matter how he threatened her, Ina stood firm. Finally, there was nothing to do but to go off together to the judge. The judge listened, but this time, though he could stroke his beard and stare at the rich man's silken robe all he wanted, he could not think of a way to let the rich man off.
It is my decision that the buyer must give the maiden 2 pieces of silver for the firewood and 50 gold pieces for his hand.
At this, the rich man flew into a rage and was ready to give up the firewood, the broken down donkey, the miserable old ox, the chipped axe, and all. But it was too late. Handing the money to Ina, he said,
You may have outsmarted me this time, you wretched little girl, but don't think you're going to go bragging to any of your friends about this. I'm still smarter than you. And just to show you, let's make a wager. I'll tell you the most fantastic thing that's ever happened to me, and you do the same. Whoever's story is more fantastic, and whoever does not call the other a liar, wins. Do you agree to those conditions? Good. I will wager 50 gold pieces, and you can wager whatever you wish.
I agree, uncle. I will wager you my head. You can do what you like with my life. And, if you will, and, as you are older than I, you must begin first.
The rich man winked at the judge and began his story.
One day, I found 3 grains of wheat in my pocket. I threw them out the window, and in no time there appeared outside of my window a wheat field so tall and so thick that camels and people on horses could ride around in it for days. And then, what do you think happened? No? I'll tell you. 40 of my best goats went out into the field and got lost. I called to them and called to them, but they had vanished without a trace. Fall came, the wheat ripened. My workers harvested the wheat, but the bones of the goats were nowhere to be found. They threshed the wheat. Still, no sign began to chew. Suddenly, there was such a shrieking and a bleating in my head that my mouth flew open and out jumped 40 goats, one after another. Before my very eyes, they began capering about on the Quran. So fat were they that each was as big as a 4-year-old bull calf.
When the rich man had finished his story, even the judge shook his head reproachfully. But Ina was unmoved.
Uncle, I see your story is one of purest truth. Often cleverer men, have even funnier adventures. Now, listen to my story.
And Ina began her tale.
One day, in the middle of my farm, I planted a tiny cotton seed. And what do you think happened? The very next day, I returned to the same spot, and in that place stood a tall cotton plant. It grew higher than the clouds and cast a shadow as far as a 3-day journey. When the cotton was ripe, I picked it, I cleaned it, and I sold it to an old woman I know. With that money, I bought 40 one-humped camels. I loaded them up with precious cloth, and I sent my eldest brother to take the caravan to the bazaar in Bukhara. It has been 3 years, and I still have not heard word of my brother. But not long ago, I heard that he had been overtaken on the road and murdered by some black-bearded villain. Now, Uncle, I can never hope to find this villain, but fate has been kind to me, for I realize now that you are the murderer. Because that is my brother's silken robe you are wearing.
When Ina said these words, the judge fairly leaped from his seat, and the rich man fell flat on the floor. Now what was to be done? To say the girl was lying meant to give her 50 gold pieces. To say that she spoke the truth would be even worse, for then she would demand recompense for her murdered brother, and 40 of the finest one-hunt camels laden with precious goods besides. Finally, the rich man could bear it no longer.
May your tongue stick to a stone. It's all lies, lies, lies. You wretched girl, take your 50 gold pieces and take my robe too, only get out of my face before I wring your neck.
Ina took the gold, wrapped it in the rich man's robe, and ran home to her father as fast as her legs would carry her. The woodcutter, anxious at his daughter's long absence, had come out into the steppe to look for her. Soon he caught sight of her running toward him. He threw his arms around her neck and cried,
Ada, my little beaver hat! What happened to you? Where have you been such a long time? And whatever has happened to the ox?
Oh, may blue skies shine upon you, Father. I have returned safely from the city where I have sold the ox to the black-bearded man as is.
Oh, my poor child. The hard-hearted rich man has deceived you. Now we are lost, and it is all my fault.
Dear Father, do not despair. I received a very good price.
and she held out to her father the rolled-up silken robe.
Oh, this is a very beautiful and costly robe indeed, but what good will it do me, a poor woodcutter, without the axe and the old donkey and the old ox? We will have to live on alms.
Then Ina, saying not a word, unrolled the silken robe, and from it fell the 100 gold pieces and the 2 pieces of silver. The woodcutter looked in amazement, first at the glittering coins, then at his daughter, and could hardly believe it was not a dream. The girl threw her arms around his neck and told him everything that had happened in town. The woodcutter laughed and cried as he listened to his daughter. Ina finished her story with these words.
Oh, Father, where the rich
his 100 gold coins, we can live happily and contentedly for the rest of our days.
The end.
The Magic Garden. Once upon a time there lived two poor friends named Asan and Hassan. Asan tilled his bit of earth, and Hassan watched his tiny flock. And between the two of them, they managed to eke out a living. Now, the two friends' wives had died many years before, leaving them each with a child. Asan had a beautiful and loving daughter who was his consolation, and Hassan had a strong and obedient son who was his hope. One spring, as Asan was preparing to go to his field, the worst of calamities befell Hassan. The dreaded blizzard struck, and every one of the poor fellow's sheep died. In tears, Hassan came limping to his friend.
Hassan, I have come to bid you farewell. My flock is perished. Without it, I too will soon die.
At this, Hassan clasped his friend to his breast, crying,
Hassan, you are half of my heart. Do not refuse half of my field. Dry your tears. Take up this hoe and come off to work with me.
Thus it was that Hassan became a landowner like his friend. Days passed. Nights passed. Months passed. Years passed. One day, Hassan was digging in his half of the field when suddenly his hoe struck something hard. He began to dig feverishly, and in no time he had uncovered an old pot filled with gold coins. Mad with joy, Hassan seized the pot and raced to the mud hut of his friend.
Hassan! Hassan, rejoice! You are in luck. I have dug up a pot of gold. Now you need never be poor again as long as you live.
I know your unselfishness, Hassan, but the gold is yours. After all, you found it on your half of the field.
Hassan, I know your generosity, but when you gave me the land, you did not give me everything that was in its bowels as well.
My friend, the riches of the earth belong to whomsoever sheds his sweat upon that earth. The gold is yours.
They quarreled and quarreled. Each refused to take the pot of gold. Finally, Hassan sighed.
Hassan, this is foolish. I have a daughter, you have a son. Have they not loved each other since they were children? Let them marry, and we will give them this gold. May our children never know what it is to be poor.
When Asan and Hassan told the young people of this decision, they almost died of happiness. The wedding was held that very day with great joy and merrymaking. The boy and the girl settled down on Hassan's land, and Hassan moved over to live with his friend Asan. The next day, it was barely light when the young couple appeared at their father's doorstep. In their hands, they held the pot of gold.
What is it, children?
Has something gone wrong already?
We have come to tell you that it is not fitting for children to keep which by rights belongs to their parents.
What is this gold to us? Our love is the greatest treasure we could ever have.
They put down the pot of gold in the middle of the field and went home. Now Asan and Hassan began to argue as before about who should take this treasure. The quarrel dragged on so long that at last it was decided that all four should take the gold to a certain wise man. who was known for his honesty and his fairness. They walked and they walked, and at last they came to the hut of the wise man. The travelers, after begging permission to enter, went into the hut and bowed low. There sat the wise man, and next to him his 3 pupils.
What brings you here, good people?
The visitors told him about their quarrel. When they finished, the wise man sat for a long time in silence. Then turning to his eldest pupil, he said,
Tell me, my son, if you were in my place, how would you solve the problem?
I would command that all the gold be given to the Khan, for all the treasures of the earth rightfully belong to him.
The wise man frowned and said to his second pupil,
And how would you solve the problem if you were me?
Since the gold belongs to no one and no one is willing to accept it, I would put it back in the earth where it came from.
The wise man frowned even harder. But nevertheless, he turned to the third and youngest pupil.
What do you say, my child?
Oh, teacher, forgive my simplicity, but this is what I would do. With this gold, I would buy seeds. And with the seeds, I would plant, in the barrenmost part of the steppe, a vast and shaded garden, so that all the tired and weary poor might rest there and enjoy its fruits.
At these words, the wise man rose, and with tears in his eyes, embraced the boy.
Truly, it is said, consider even the youngest older than yourself, if he is wise. Your decision is a just one, my child. Here, take this gold, go to the capital where the Khan lives, buy yourself the best seeds you can find, and then, when you have returned, plant the garden of which you spoke. And may the memory of you and the good people who brought the gold live on forever in the hearts of the poor.
The youth put the treasure in a bag at once, and hoisting it over his shoulder, set forth. For days and days he walked through the steppe, and at last he arrived safely at the capital of the Khan. He looked for sellers of fruit seeds, so he went to the bazaar.
Hey,
No, only silks. They're beautiful silks.
While he was wandering thus, looking at all the strange and wonderful wares, he suddenly heard behind him the tinkle of caravan bells, followed by piercing shrieks. The youth turned, and what did he see crossing the square but an enormous caravan bearing a strange cargo? Instead of bales of baked goods, the camels were laden with thousands and thousands of live birds. Birds of the mountains and the forest, the steppes and the deserts. They were tied by their feet, their wings dangling limp and crumpled like rags, and above them floated clouds of multicolored feathers. The youth's heart was wrung with pity. He pushed his way through the curious onlookers and went right to the leader of the caravan.
who has doomed these magnificent birds to such torment, and where are you bound with them?
We are bound for the palace of the Khan. These birds are destined for the king's table. He'll pay us 500 pieces for them.
If I give you twice that much in gold, we will let the birds go free.
Then the youth took from his shoulder the leather bag and opened it for the caravan leader to see. The caravan leader stopped, not believing his eyes, and at the thought of all that gold, he at once set the birds free. Sensing their freedom, the wondrous birds rushed into the sky. So many were them that at that instant day became night. With the flapping of their wings, a hurricane blew throughout the land. For a long time the youth followed the disappearing birds with his eyes, and when they were gone from sight, he picked up his empty bag and started for home. His heart sang, his feet tripped merrily along as if for the life of their own. But the closer he came to home, the more gloomy were the thoughts that took hold of him. His heart was filled with remorse.
Whoever gave me the right to spend another's money on such a foolish whim? Did I not promise to plant a garden for the poor? Whatever will I say to my teacher and those simple-hearted folk who are waiting for me to come back with the seeds?
Little by little, he was overcome with despair, and falling to his knees, he began to weep, calling death down upon his head. At last, so exhausted with grief was he, that his eyelids closed in spite of themselves, and he fell fast asleep. Suddenly there came a beautiful, bright-colored bird. She began to sing in a clear, sweet voice. Oh, good youth, forget your sorrow. The birds you have freed cannot return the gold to you, but they can reward you in another way for your kindness. Wake up, and what you will see will dry your tears at once. Having sung thus, the bird flew away, and the youth opened his eyes and looked about him in astonishment. The whole vast steppe was covered with birds, busy at some mysterious task. They were scratching in the earth with their claws, dropping into the holes white seeds from their beaks, and then with their wings covering the seeds with earth. The youth stood. Suddenly the birds rushed into the sky. Again, day became night, and with the flapping of their wings, a hurricane blew throughout the land. But then something even more amazing happened. From each hole filled with seeds, there sprang forth tender young shoots, which before the youth's very eyes grew into giant trees weighted down with branches, heavy with splendid foliage. In the twinkling of an eye, the branches of the tree blossomed forth with flowers, filling the air with their sweet fragrance. And then, just as suddenly, the blossoms fell, and in their place appeared wondrous golden apples. The Pasha of India himself could not have had a more magnificent and spacious garden. There were apple trees with bark like amber, around whose slender trunks entwined fertile grapevines, heavy with grapes. There were sunny meadows, covered with lush green grass and bright tulips. There were broad, shady paths strewn with petals, and on either side of the paths gurgled cold, clear water in irrigation ditches, paved with precious stones. Overhead the birds fluttered and chirped, as beautiful and sweet-voiced as the beautiful bird that had appeared to the youth. The youth looked about him in astonishment and could not believe his eyes. To make sure he was not still dreaming, he shouted aloud. His voice echoed and re-echoed all over the steppe, and the garden did not disappear. It was just as he had envisioned. In no time, word of the magic garden spread far and wide throughout the steppe. The first to reach it were the nobles on their swift runners. But no sooner had they reached the edge of the garden than there rose before them a mighty wall with gates of iron, each gate locked with 7 locks.
Bir, iki, üç, dört, beş, altı, yedi.
The greedy nobles scrambled to stand up in their carved saddles. They reached over the wall to the golden apples, but as soon as they touched the apples, they died and fell to the ground.
Tell my mother I love her!
Then the poor came, crowding in from every side. As they approached, the locks fell from the iron gates and the gates swung wide. Soon, the garden was filled with poor people, young and old. They strolled along the paths. They drank from the ditches. They picked the fruit from the trees and ate it. And all that day the magic garden rang with happy talk, loud laughter, and the music of the Dombra. When night came and darkness settled over the earth, the apple trees began to glow with a soft blue light. The birds chirped in a chorus their sweet and quiet song. And then the poor people stretched out under the trees on the sweet scented grass and fell asleep happy and content for the first time in their lives. The end. Strawberries and cheese. We've also got little cream puffs coming up. So please enjoy, chat, stay a moment.